When I bought my lakeside home, it wasn't for prestige, square footage, or some desperate need to show off on social media. It was for peace. Peace and fishing. That's it. The house itself was modest by the standards of Willow Pines, a gated lifestyle community run by an HOA that boasted about exclusive amenities and controlled beauty. But what sold me was the lake. It spanned nearly 50 acres, shimmered under the sun like a liquid diamond, and wrapped around the neighborhood like a lazy arm. The listing showed the backyard sloping right down to the shoreline private access. It said, ideal for kayaking, fishing, or quiet mornings with coffee. And that's exactly what I did. My first morning there, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, grabbed my rod and tackle box, and cast a line out into the still waters. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about deadlines, bills, or politics. Just the breeze, the line, and the gentle splash of fish below. 3 days later, I got fined. The envelope showed up in my mailbox with the HOA seal in bold across the top and a typed letter inside that read, "Dear resident, we regret to inform you that you are in violation of HOA Regulation 7C regarding unauthorized recreational usage of community natural resources. Fishing from the lake is strictly prohibited without prior approval and a community license. A fine of $150 has been assessed to your account. Repeated violations may result in additional penalties and potential loss of community privileges." I laughed, out loud, then reread it, just to be sure. I wasn't imagining it. I was being fined for fishing from my own backyard, a lake I was told I had private access to. At first, I figured it was a clerical error. Maybe they mistook my lot for one of the shared areas on the far side of the lake, where there were indeed docks used by the neighborhood. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I called the number on the letter. A cheerful woman answered. I explained the situation calmly. She put me on hold, came back 2 minutes later, and said, "Mr. Dalton, the HOA has full management rights over Lake Silverpine." "Fishing is regulated by the board," I said. "That lake backs directly onto my property. Are you saying I can't cast a line from my own land?" There was a pause. Then, "Only from designated HOA zones. Please refer to the community map." Click. I was stunned, and I hadn't even met Karen yet. But I was about to. The next morning, as if summoned by the absurdity of it all, she appeared. Karen, for context, looked exactly like someone who would write a 7-paragraph Yelp review about unsanctioned wind chimes. Early 60s, blonde bob helmeted with hairspray, perfectly creased khakis, and that unmistakable gleam of HOA tyranny in her eyes. She walked right up to my yard, not quite stepping onto my property, but close enough to smell the coffee I was holding. "Good morning," she chirped, as if we were old friends. "I'm Karen, president of the Willow Pines O." She pointed to the tackle box by my chair. "Just a quick reminder that fishing from here is actually restricted." I blinked. "You mean my backyard?" She smiled, too wide. "Yes, technically the lake is considered a community resource. The shoreline is regulated for safety and environmental reasons." I gestured to the quiet water, the lack of humans, and the dragonfly that had just landed on my coffee mug. "Does this look unsafe to you?" She ignored the sarcasm. "It's not personal, just policy." I said I'd be contacting a lawyer. Her smile didn't budge. "Feel free, but in the meantime, further violations will be met with escalating fines. We take the stewardship of our lake very seriously here." She turned and walked away, clipboard swinging like a weapon of suburban oppression. The next day, another fine arrived. This one for $300. I hadn't even fished that day. Karen had officially warned I was still in the trying to reason phase of things. I pulled out the paperwork from my home purchase. There it was again in black and white. Private lake access. I called my realtor, who said, "That's always been a gray area with that community. The HOA claims jurisdiction, but I've never seen anyone fined over it before." I asked if the HOA owned the lake. Not exactly. They lease management rights from the original developer, but the ownership situation's a little murky. Murky, like lake water. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to play nice. I skipped fishing, hoping the situation would cool off. I went to an HOA meeting, thinking I'd appeal the fine or at least get clarification. Instead, I was greeted by Karen sitting at the head of the table like Judge Judy's uptight cousin. She opened the meeting with, "Let's address the ongoing lake violations from Lot 17. She didn't say my name, but every head turned to me anyway. I laid out my case. The deed, the listing, the absurdity of regulating private shoreline like a public dock. She listened, nodded, and then said, "The board maintains that access does not imply usage." I blinked. "So I can access the lake but not use it?" "That's correct." I said, "If I poured coffee into the lake right now, would that be a violation?" She frowned. "If it affected the environmental balance, yes." A man 3 seats down stifled a laugh. Karen pounced. "This is a serious matter. The lake's ecosystem is delicate. If we allow one homeowner to fish, what's next? Jet skis? Oil rigs?" The room sat in stunned silence. That's when I knew this wasn't about fish. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. Karen had it. I challenged it, and she wasn't about to give it up. But neither was I. And I was about to find out that if you follow the right trail through public records, zoning maps, and outdated contracts, you might just find out who really owns the water. After that HOA meeting, any hope I had of reaching a peaceful understanding drowned right there in Lake Silverpine. Karen didn't want compromises. He wanted obedience. That kind of thin-lipped, rules for the sake of rules obedience that turns community boards into mini dictatorships and turns ordinary people into targets the moment they decide they're not going to roll over. And now, I was that target. The guy who dared cast a line without permission, the guy who smiled during her PowerPoint, the guy she needed to make an example out of. The fines didn't stop. They just got creative. I was hit with a $150 repeat violation fee, even though I hadn't fished since the meeting. Then a $200 environmental disruption citation, claiming my tackle box was visible from a common viewing path and therefore constituted a visual pollutant. I started getting letters about shoreline clutter and unauthorized lawn slope grading. One morning I walked outside and found a laminated "Notice of Pending Evaluation" sign stuck in my yard like a threat from a jealous lawn god. Karen had weaponized the HOA codebook like it was her own personal artillery. And she wasn't acting alone. Karen rallied a small, loyal squad of rule fanatics retired types with too much time, golf carts, and deeply buried resentment for anyone who didn't RSVP to the annual chili cook-off. They started monitoring my backyard. I caught them peering over the fence, snapping photos of my dock, writing things down on notepads like suburban spies. One guy, Roy, even brought binoculars and a lawn chair. When I confronted him, he said, "Just bird watching." I said, "You're facing the lake." He grinned. Long-necked swans. It was comical until it wasn't. That's when Karen escalated from petty fines to full-on regulatory fiction. I received a certified letter titled "Cease and Desist." aquatic trespassing. According to her, the HOA had exclusive oversight over the lake, and my physical presence on or near it was now considered a form of trespass. That's right. I was being told I was trespassing in my own backyard. I brought the letter to my lawyer, Emma, a brilliant woman with a no BS attitude and a deep dislike for HOA overreach. She read it, raised an eyebrow, and said, "This is one of the dumbest legal threats I've ever seen. Congratulations." She asked, "Do they even own the lake?" I said, "Apparently they lease it from someone, but I can't get a straight answer." That's when her eyes lit up. "Let's find out." And that's when the real game began. We started digging. Emma requested all public records related to the lake ownership deeds, environmental permits, water management contracts. I submitted FOIA requests to the local planning office and water authority. We even hired a title company to do a full historical trace. And buried deep in the paper trail beneath decades of developer transfers, LLC dissolutions, and HOA nonsense, we found something magical: the original ownership agreement from 1996. And guess what? The HOA never owned the lake. They had a non-exclusive maintenance agreement with the original developer granted to maintain the surrounding park and docks, not the entire body of water. That agreement expired 5 years ago and was never renewed, which meant the lake was currently listed as privately held property, belonging to a holding company that had quietly dissolved 2 years prior. In short, it was an orphaned asset. That's when Emma asked the golden question: "Has anyone tried to buy it?" The answer? No. And the price? Surprisingly reasonable. Because the lake came with no public utility hookup, required yearly maintenance, and had no development rights, the county had listed it as a recreational parcel at a tax reduction rate. Emma looked at me and said, "You could own this lake, like actually own it. Dock, water, shoreline, all of it." I was stunned. "Are you serious?" She smiled. "Dead serious. Buy the lake. Kick them all out." It sounded crazy, vindictive, like something out of a sitcom. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't just retaliating, I was protecting myself. Karen had turned my backyard into a battleground, tried to paint me as a vandal, and weaponized a false claim of ownership against me. If I owned the lake, she wouldn't just lose her leverages, he'd lose her mind. So I made an offer. Cash, clean, fast. And just like that, things started to shift. Karen must have caught wind, because 2 days after we submitted the paperwork, she sent a neighborhood-wide email titled "Preserving Our Lake for Future Generations." It was the most unhinged thing I'd ever read. She called me a rogue homeowner, accused me of trying to seize a sacred community landmark, and warned that private acquisition of public beauty was a form of environmental tyranny. She tried to organize a petition. It got 6 signatures. One of them was her dog's. Meanwhile, I was finalizing the purchase. The county board was thrilled to offload the liability. The holding company's rights were cleanly transferred, and after a few tense weeks of paperwork, it was official. I owned Lake Silverpine. Every inch, every fish, every ripple. Karen didn't know it yet, but her days of policing my backyard were officially over. The man she fined for fishing was now the man who controlled the dock she stood on. And I hadn't even started making the new rules. Owning a lake sounds like something reserved for eccentric billionaires, movie villains, or reclusive authors with brooding past snot for a guy like me who just wanted to catch base in peace. But as I held the notarized deed in my hands, stamped and sealed with the county's approval, I realized I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a lake owner, and not just any lake, Karen's lake. The same one she patrolled like a mall cop with delusions of grandeur. The same one she insisted was protected community property. The same one she fined me over like a tyrant micromanaging a sandbox. It was mine now, and the weight of that was delicious. Emma, my lawyer, was practically giddy. "This is one of the cleanest flips I've ever seen," she said. "Ho Karen's about to have a meltdown that registers on the Richter scale." And she wasn't wrong. The moment the paperwork cleared and the lake was officially registered under my name, we prepared a polite but firm notice to the HOA board. The letter was short and professional. As of May 1, 2025, Lake Silverpine has transferred ownership to John M. Reynolds. All prior management agreements have expired or are void. Future access must be authorized by the new property owner. Effective immediately, the lake is designated as private property. Unapproved usage, including fishing, swimming, or docking, will be considered trespassing. We CC'd the board, the city, and, of course, Karen. She replied within 5 hours. Her email was pure, unfiltered panic. "This is unacceptable. The lake has been the spiritual and recreational heart of this community for decades. Your actions are predatory, selfish, and likely illegal. I will be contesting this acquisition through every available legal channel." Emma responded. "We welcome your legal challenge. Please refer to attached deed, transfer agreement, and the expired maintenance contract your HOA never renewed. Thank you." It was the kind of mic drop moment lawyers dream of. I didn't stop there. The very next morning, I had a large sign posted on the walking path near the shoreline. Not gaudy, just clear and direct, white background, black lettering. It read, "Private lake. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Access by permission only. Former HOA permissions void." Beneath it, I mounted a laminated copy of the county deed. No ambiguity, no wiggle room. It was official. Karen's response? Apocalyptic. She stormed out of her house and began shrieking at a poor landscaper who'd paused near the sign with a weed trimmer. "You can't let him do this. That lake belongs to the people," she screeched. "This is eco-fascism." The man looked stunned. "Ma'am, I'm just here to edge the sidewalk." Then came the campaign. Karen printed homemade flyers with phrases like "Save our shoreline" and "Stop the lake lockdown." She slid them under every door in the community. She accused me of destroying the neighborhood's soul. She even called a local newspaper, which ran the headline, "Man buys lake, declares it private HOA in uproar." The reporter, to their credit, was fair. They printed my statement. The HOA never owned the lake. Their agreement expired 5 years ago. I legally purchased it. I am simply exercising my rights as a property owner. If others had done their due diligence, they could have done the same. That final sentence enraged Karen. She sent another email blast titled, "Corporate Greed Strikes Willow Pines." She compared me to a land baron, accused me of trying to privatize nature, and called for an emergency HO vote to restore access to the people's water. It failed, badly. Only 2 people showed up. One of them left halfway through when Karen started quoting Thoreau out of context. But I wasn't done. I hired a surveyor to restake the property lines. I placed discreet no trespassing markers at key entry points. I installed wildlife-friendly lighting, updated the erosion barriers, and began building a small, tasteful dock at the center of my shoreline, just big enough for me and maybe a friend or two. I bought a kayak, I bought a fishing canoe, I even bought a floating cooler. And just to put the cherry on top, I installed trail camera covert, motion sensing, night vision capable to monitor any unauthorized usage of the lake. Within a week, I caught Karen tiptoeing along the shore in yoga pants and a visor, holding a tape measure and muttering something about historical access. I printed the still image from the camera feed, mailed it to her with a post-it that said, "Next time, ask permission." That was the last time she got within 50 feet of the water. The rest of the HOA was stunned but secretly amused. People began sending me private messages thanking me. One couple left a bottle of wine on my doorstep with a card that read, "Finally, someone stood up to her." Another neighbor stopped me while walking his dog and said, "You just did what the rest of us were too afraid to try." The lake, once patrolled by Karen's rules and HOA paranoia, was now a symbol of rebellion. But it wasn't about rebellion anymore, not really. It was about reclaiming control from a group that never deserved it. And making sure that no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not any overzealous clipboard wielder could ever stop me from fishing again. Because now, the lake was mine. Every ripple, every fish, every sunrise. And we were just getting started. Once the lake was legally and unequivocally mine, the next logical step wasn't just to enjoy it, it was to secure it. Karen might have lost control, but she hadn't lost her appetite for meddling, and I knew from her past behavior that she wasn't going to just sit on her sun porch knitting angry manifestos. No, Karen was a storm wrapped in yoga pants and HOA bylaws, and she was going to come for me with everything she had left. So, I went from peaceful fisherman to strategic fortress builder. Not literally, I didn't install moats or turrets, but let's just say I hardened the perimeter in ways Karen never saw coming. The first thing I did was hire a contractor to install a permanent steel gate at the narrow path that led from the public walking trail to my private shoreline. The path itself, according to the land survey, was 52 inches over the property line, meaning legally, it was mine too. The gate was elegant, not ostentatious, black iron bars, a keypad lock, and a small sign that read simply, "Private lake access, no trespassing." But to Karen, it might as well have said "No Karen's allowed." I also had a small floating barrier installed, a discreet line of orange buoys near the middle of the lake, marking the edge of the newly designated private zone. I didn't prohibit boating entirely, but I made it clear that casting lines, anchoring, or swimming in that half of the lake was off limits unless you had my written permission. I distributed the new boundaries with diagrams to every household, along with a polite letter stating the legal changes and contact information for access inquiries. It was professional, courteous, and backed by an attorney. Karen lost her mind. Her reply came fast, a 3-page, all-caps letter dripping with rage. "You have no right to restrict lake access. This is a public trust. You are acting like a feudal lord. Lake Silverpine belongs to the community." I framed that one. And then the threats began. She called another HOA meeting, this time rebranded as a community emergency forum. The flyer was hysterical. "Urgent! Stop the lake takeover! Reclaim our rights before it's too late!" She went door to door, scrawled handwritten notes in barely legible ink, and even posted a petition online with a photo of the lake's sunset captioned, "Soon to be restricted by barbed wire." That one actually made me laugh. But while Karen stirred panic, I kept calm and escalated strategically. I created a website, simple, clean, factual. www.lakesilverpineowner.com. It explained the lake's ownership history, included scanned copies of the deeds, legal documentation, and a FAQ section that addressed every concern from environmental stewardship to public safety. It even had a tab titled Myth versus Fact, which gently dismantled Karen's nonsense line by line. Emma helped me draft every word. The real masterpiece, though, was the enforcement policy. I contracted a local private security firm, not rent-a-cops, but professional, polite patrol officers trained in community relations to do daily walkthroughs during peak hours. Not to harass anyone, but to maintain the rules. They wore polos, not tactical vests, and carried clipboards instead of tasers. One of them, Marcus, turned out to be a former HOA enforcer from another community. "Never seen anything like this," he said, grinning. "You're living every homeowner's dream." I gave him a fishing pass. Karen, predictably, escalated again. She filed a formal grievance with the city zoning board, claiming I had improperly fenced off communal access to a natural resource. The city responded within a week. Their investigation included a site visit, legal review, and a meeting with my attorney. Their conclusion? No violation found. Property ownership is clear and within legal compliance. No further action will be taken. We posted a copy of that decision on the lake's entrance gate. Karen showed up the next morning and tried to rip it down. The security camera caught the whole thing, her screaming at the sign, tugging it like it owed her money, then yelling at Marcus when he politely asked her to leave the property. She shouted something about entrapment and the destruction of democracy. The clip made it to the community Facebook page within hours. The top comment read, "Karen just got owned by a laminated sign and a clipboard. Incredible." But she still wasn't done. She tried to organize a protest. 4 people showed up. 2 left early because it was hot. 1 held a sign that said, "Lakes are for everyone," until someone reminded him he didn't even live in the neighborhood. Karen, undeterred, gave an impassioned speech to nobody in particular about tyranny and lake monopolies. A kid walking his dog asked her if she needed water. She told him, "This is bigger than you'll ever understand." Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood adjusted quickly. The vast majority were fine with the changes. Some even appreciated the improved maintenance. I invested in new shoreline plantings, added a duck nesting box, and began monthly water quality testing goals shared on the website. One neighbor, a retired teacher, told me, "You've taken better care of this lake in a month than the HOA has in 10 years. And as for me, I fished. A lot. Quiet mornings, peaceful evenings, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. Always in full view of Karen's now empty dock, which sat useless and sun-bleached on the public side of the lake. I even hosted a small fishing tournament by invitation only. Winners got handcrafted wooden plaques. One of them read, "Most illegal cast, according to Karen." The lake wasn't just mine anymore. It was a boundary, a message, a hard reset for a community suffocated by micromanagement and bad faith leadership. And as I reeled in another base beneath a golden sunset, I smiled, knowing this was what victory looked like. And I still hadn't pulled the trigger on my legal counteroffensive. Owning the lake and shutting down Karen's control over it was one thing, but I hadn't even begun to reckon with the legal landmines she'd started planting once her tantrums stopped working. Because as anyone who's dealt with a true HOA zealot knows, when they lose control of their clipboard, they pick up a lawsuit. And Karen? Karen didn't just want to fine me or humiliate Mesh, wanted to bury me in paperwork, drown me in legal threats, and reverse everything I'd done by sheer force of stubborn insanity. She didn't just want the lake back. She wanted the world to forget I'd ever owned it. It started with a thick envelope delivered to my door by a sweaty courier who looked embarrassed just handing it over. Inside, a civil suit filed by the HOA against me personally, accusing me of unlawful restriction of community access, intentional obstruction of neighborhood enjoyment, and my favorite, malicious environmental control. Their argument? That even though I legally owned the lake, the community had established use rights due to years of unopposed recreational presence. In other words, because they'd been using it without permission for years, they should be allowed to continue doing so forever. It was nonsense, but dangerous nonsense, because Karen had apparently convinced the remaining HOA board members, those too spineless to stand up to her, that this was their last stand. They voted 3-2 to fund the lawsuit using the HOA's reserve funds. Yes, that meant they were using the neighborhood's own dues to sue me. When word of that got out, it was like lighting a fuse on a powder keg. Residents who'd been silent suddenly had questions. Why was Karen blowing thousands of dollars on legal fees to fight a battle she'd already lost? Why was she dragging the entire community down over a lake no one even used outside of a few holiday weekends? Still, I had to respond seriously. Emma was ready. She countersued within a week. Our response? A carefully constructed motion to dismiss backed by deeds, zoning confirmations, environmental certifications, and a comprehensive affidavit documenting the HOA's pattern of harassment, misuse of funds, and deliberate dissemination of false information. We included screenshots of Karen's inflammatory emails, her ridiculous protest flyers, and even the video footage of her vandalizing the lake signage. The packet was nearly 200 pages long. The judge took one look at it and set a hearing. The day of the court appearance, the gallery was packed. Neighbors filled the benches, whispering to each other like they were waiting for the school play to start. The HOA showed up with a smug attorney in an ill-fitting suit and Karen in tow, visibly vibrating with rage. She came armed with a binder so thick it looked like she planned to file a lawsuit against gravity. Emma and I sat calmly. She wore a gray blazer and a steel smile. I wore a fishing hat for good luck. The judge began by asking if the HOA had ownership of the lake. Their lawyer stammered, "Not currently." "Have you ever?" "Well, not technically." The judge turned to us. Emma passed up the deed, the transfer, and a concise written timeline. The judge read it, nodded once, and asked, "Did you, Mr. My Name, deny access to individuals who were not legally entitled to that property?" "Yes, Your Honor. I owned the lake. I posted clear signage and gave advanced written notice. Anyone who accessed it without permission was trespassing." Karen leapt up. "This is a travesty," she shouted. "He's destroying our traditions. The lake has always belonged to the community. Always. I used to host paddleboard yoga there." The judge didn't flinch. "Ma'am, please sit. This is not your time to speak." She didn't. She kept ranting. "He's locked it up like some kind of water tyrant. He put in buoys, fences, security cameras." The judge held up a hand. "Ma'am, one more outburst and I'll have you removed." Karen clamped her mouth shut, but only barely. She sat, red-faced, gripping the binder like she was preparing to bludgeon someone with it. The judge looked back at the room. "It is the opinion of this court that the HOA has no standing in this matter. The lake was never owned or governed by the HOA under enforceable deed or easement. The defendant acted within his full legal rights as a property owner. The lawsuit is dismissed." He paused, then added, "And I recommend the HOA board conduct a financial audit regarding its use of funds for this case. This was a colossal waste of resources." Boom. The gallery erupted. Not in cheers, this was a courtroom, but in suppressed, delighted murmurs. I could see neighbors high-fiving silently. "Karen?" She stood up, tried to say something, then realized she had absolutely no legal ground left to stand on. Her lawyer wouldn't even look her in the eye. We left the courthouse like royalty. Emma smirked. Want to hit the lake? I said. I think I'll fish right in front of Karen's dock tonight. But the fallout wasn't over. News of the failed lawsuit spread fast. The HOA's legal fees were leaked, 43,800 in total, blown on Karen's personal war. Residents lost their minds. Emergency meetings were called. People demanded to know how this happened. Karen tried to spin it as a noble sacrifice. I stood up for our values, she said in one meeting, banging the table. He bought the lake out from under us. Someone shouted, because you never signed the renewal. Another voice yelled, you said we owned the lake. A third, I want my dues back. That was the end. The HOA board voted to suspend Karen indefinitely and disband the current leadership. An outside auditor was brought in. Karen vanished from the public eye, refusing interviews, dodging neighbors. Her house went up for sale within the month. I threw another private fishing tournament, this time with trophies. The winning one? Best legal cast now HOA free. Karen's dock remained silent. No paddleboards, no clipboards. Just peace. And the soft, satisfying splash of a well-cast line. With the lawsuit behind me and the HOA effectively gutted from the inside out, the neighborhood took a deep, collective breath. The tension that had once buzzed like a mosquito cloud over Lake Silverpine finally dissipated. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder every time I baited a hook. There were no new notices in the mailbox, no binoculars aimed at my dock, no HOA inspection walks passing by under the guise of fitness. Karen's reign of policy terrorism had ended not with applause, but with a quiet thud of embarrassment and unpaid legal fees. And in her place, a silence so profound it felt sacred. Karen moved out quietly. One day, her windows were still glaring down over the lake like judgmental eyes, and the next, a moving truck was parked in her driveway. No goodbyes, no rants, no flyers. Just the slow loading of cardboard boxes and one very grumpy schnauzer. A neighbor texted me a blurry photo of her driving away, her sun visor crooked, her mouth mid-scowl. The caption read, "The wicked witch of the wake is gone." I don't know where she went. I didn't care. All I knew was that she no longer lived within shouting distance of my shoreline. And as for the HOA, it collapsed on itself like a folding chair under too much pressure. After the courtroom embarrassment and the audit that revealed financial mismanagement worse than anyone expected, no one stepped up to replace the departing board. Why would they? Who wants to volunteer for a group known only for issuing trash bin citations and harassing fishermen? Without a board, dues weren't collected, rules weren't enforced. And what emerged from the ashes was a beautiful, unintended side effect. A community that acted like neighbors instead of watchdogs. People helped each other repaint fences. Kids played without their parents worrying about getting written up for excessive sidewalk chalk. Someone built a little lending library at the end of the cul-de-sac, and no one fined them for unapproved curbside structures. We had a Halloween block party for the first time in years. A couple even got married on the public side of the Lake Small ceremony. Short vows, no clipboards in sight. As for me, I kept fishing. And the Lake Me Lake became more than just water. It was a monument, a message. A reminder that if someone tells you to sit down and shut up long enough, and you stand instead, you might just end up with the deed to the place they thought they ruled. I upgraded the dock. Nothing flashy, just new boards, fresh sealant, and a couple of chairs with built-in rod holders. I added solar-powered lights that glowed softly at night, guiding my way even when the sky went dark. I had a brass plaque made, mounted at the end of the dock. It read, Lake Silverpine, privately owned, formerly ruled by HOA chaos, now governed by bass, bluegill, and peace. People came to respect it. A few even asked politely if they could fish with me sometimes. I said yes, because I wasn't Karen. My goal was never to hoard access. It was about fairness, boundaries. The right to enjoy something I legally owned without being stalked by someone who thought bylaws were holy scripture. And the truth? Sharing felt better without the pressure. When you own the space, generosity is yours to give, not to be demanded. I kept running the now annual fishing tournament. The neighborhood loved it. We gave out funny awards like First Splash, Most Dramatic Cast, and the coveted Karen's Worst Nightmare plaque. It brought people together in a way I never could have predicted. I started getting thank you notes from residents who'd once been terrified to step on their own lawns. One man wrote, Your fight reminded us that we don't have to accept overreach. Thanks for making this place feel like home again. And that made me think, maybe this wasn't just about a lake. Maybe it was about power. Not the kind you abuse, but the kind you reclaim. The quiet power of saying, no, I won't let you intimidate me. The powerful relief of finally being left alone. The peace of morning mist rising off water you fought for. Of casting a line and knowing no Wanino clipboard, no committee, no Karenis going to tell you that you can't. I still have that first tackle box. The same one Karen claimed was a visual pollutant. I keep it under my bench on the dock. Every now and then I take it out, run my hand over the old scratches, and smile. That box started a war. A petty, bureaucratic, ridiculous war. But I won, not with screaming, not with vandalism, not with revenge. I won with a deed, a gate, a fishing rod, and a refusal to back down. Now the lake is still, and so is my life, exactly the way it should be.